Good evening, and welcome again to Public Perspective. I'm your host, Kevin McDermott. And in the political season in which we find ourselves now, there's a lot of talk about the extensive amounts of money that are being fed into the political system, all as a part of what is known as corporate personhood. So tonight we'll be talking about what corporate personhood really means, whether or not it should exist, and if not, how do we change that? And our guests tonight are both representatives of an informal group that's assembling around the country called Move to Amend. We have both Steve Alish and Sharon Sanders here. Sharon, Steve, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having us.
So let's start with the basics. Sharon, what is Move to Amend?
Well, it's an attempt to overturn Citizens United.
Talk about what is Citizens United.
Citizens United was the Supreme Court decision, which was actually based on political, or it was actually voted on by activist political judges who had a definite leaning one way or the other in terms of what they wanted to do for corporations. And what they decided was that corporations were people and they had the same rights as you and I, and therefore it freed up them to do anything they wanted in terms of corporations putting together money into super PACs where they were totally accountable to anybody else except the organization or the person they wanted to support.
So in the Citizens United, I think it's important for our viewers who may not be familiar with it. It was a case, Citizens United was a group that was trying to put together a documentary about Hillary Clinton when
Correct.
she was running.
Right.
And they were forbidden from showing this, and it's within a certain window of time near the election. And the decision that you're referring to in the Supreme Court was whether or not that was a restriction on free speech.
Correct.
But it was much more than that.
But yes, and it turns out that
Finally.
that was the underlying question, and the court took it on to determine that. But as you can finish this for me, Steve, but it ended up being a much more broadly reaching decision, correct?
Yeah, because when Citizens United came before the Supreme Court told them, we want to make a ruling on a bigger question. We want to have a ruling on if corporations can contribute to political campaigns and what the limits are on their contributions. So go back, retool, bring a different case to us, a much wider case that we can rule on. And so they did. They came back, and they not only ruled that it was unconstitutional. That's part of the McCain-Feingold law was this restriction on showing any kind of campaign videos by third-party organizations within 30 days before an election. They said that was unconstitutional. They overturned that part of the law, but they also overturned the question of limits on corporate financing of elections. They came to a ruling that was then supported by later federal rulings that allowed corporations to spend unlimited amounts of their treasury to influence our political elections, and they can do it secretly, and they can use their treasuries from both foreign and domestic sources.
Now, previously, using foreign money in domestic elections here was illegal. Foreign money could not be used to fund a political campaign. Now, in this case with Citizens United, and if I have this correctly, there's still a restriction on corporations giving directly to a campaign.
That's true.
They cannot give to a candidate directly. They can, however, as you mentioned earlier, form these super PACs. And
Yes.
for people who don't know, that's a political action committee, is a PAC. And the super PACs can accept these unlimited donations from corporations or any large group. It could be an individual, could be a labor union, although we're not talking about the same scale of money that labor unions don't have the resources that ExxonMobil, for example, might have. So they can give to these super PACs, and the super PACs then are unrestricted in what they can do to back these candidates or political positions, correct?
They can't, go ahead.
Well, I think generally that the money is to be used in most super PACs for buying commercials. I think they think that's the most effective way of getting a good use of their money. And
well, in fact, it's been shown that TV commercials are very effective, right?
Well, they're not allowed to directly give to the
Not
political
directly.
candidates.
Right,
But
but
they
they
can-
can run commercials on their
Exactly.
behalf.
Right.
They
As long-
could put up yard signs, on their own. They could do the robocalls. They can do everything that a political campaign can do. but they have to stay non-connected, as they say.
In fact, you probably watch the Stephen Colbert
Oh,
show,
yes.
right?
Hilarious.
Right.
And so Jon Stewart is his uncoordinated, unconnected manager of his super PAC, which
Well, Colbert has taken it back.
he's now
Yeah, he got it
managing his
back.
own super PAC.
He was running for president of the United States of South Carolina, and only during that primary. And then when that primary was over, and he had to hand over his super PAC while he was running.
Ah,
And
So
but
now
since
that he's no
the
longer
primary's
running,
over,
he can take
he
it back
had to
now.
get it back. He got it back from Colbert. I mean from Stewart.
Yeah, yeah. So we laugh about it, but it's not an absurd situation at all, is it, Sharon? I mean, this is something serious.
Well, I think that I have watched over the years as this country has deteriorated as a result of the, again, the courts, and I'm probably not saying this right, watching these courts just sitting there and deciding on behalf of corporations. And this is not a new thing. This has happened over years, slowly, one decision after another. And the blatancy with which judges like Clarence Thomas and Alito go to parties and events and have no problem at all meeting with the same people who they're deciding votes on, and rather than recusing themselves. This is a major, major problem we're having, and
Well,
it's
shouldn't
almost like they're laughing in our faces.
I mean, shouldn't a Supreme Court judge be allowed to socialize, though?
They can socialize, and I guess they could say whoever they want, but if they're deciding on a particular case, I think that there would just be a basic conflict of interest rules there. That it's the assumption that they are deciding based upon their friendships with a particular group, and it's a conflict of interest. Clarence Thomas has many of these problems in terms of conflicts of interest, but the fact that I think that you should stay away from associating with companies you're deciding on, at least for a given period of time. Of course, you have to have friends, but I think they have shown that their leanings when they're making these decisions, and these decisions have affected everybody adversely.
Well, let's talk for a minute about the move to amend as well. Now, that, as I understand, is a national movement, national organization as well, right?
Right.
And so, what does that name mean? Move to amend what?
It's the effort to amend the U.S. Constitution to both end corporate personhood, and we can go into what that is, and also to state in the Constitution an amendment that money is not speech. And why that's critical is because that was the basis of the Citizens United decision. The Citizens United decision was based on this concept of corporate personhood, which is this idea that corporations are given the same rights as a person. Now, this
Under
is
the
clearly
same constitutional rights, freedom of speech,
Same
freedom of
constitu-
assembly, all of those in the Bill of Rights all apply equally to corporations as they would to individuals, correct?
right, which is a complete abomination of what our country was first based on. The United States, the Constitution is the most amazing document.
It's true.
We had, prior to the U.S. Constitution, for 7,000 years in world history, there was only one democracy, that was Greece, for a short period of time. So there really was no democracy until the U.S. came along. We came up with this amazing document that instead of the situation where up until then, warlord kings, theocratic popes and mullahs, or extremely rich people, and often those were all the same person, they ran the country, and they had the rights, and the serfs only had privileges they extended to them, which they could take away anytime they wanted. The U.S. Constitution turned that completely on its head. It said, we the people have the rights. And these groups, like corporations or even the government, any group, they don't have the same rights as the people. The people
Well,
have the
now-
rights. The corporation had privileges which could be taken away by the people if they found the corporation abused their privileges and didn't act in the public interest.
Why should a corporation not have these rights? Sharon, what's wrong with corporations having?
They're
rights
simply
of a
they're
person-
simply not
personhood.
people, and you could look at it various ways. But I think the fact that, and this has been said too, that a corporation is made up with people. It's made up of people, of shareholders, and the shareholders are not consulted in terms of what decisions the corporations are making. And
But that's the nature of corporate structure. I mean, the shareholders invest their money and they hire managers to make the decisions. I mean, the shareholders are not consulted about really any aspect other than just the board of directors.
Well, a public company, I think that they should be. I don't think a corporation should make political decisions, first of all. And second of all, they're just simply not people. Initially, corporations were given rights of contracts, et cetera, and they had certain basic rights they could fight for if something wasn't fair, but not to control political elections.
They actually weren't rights, they were privileges. And when a corporation is formed, the people give them the privilege of having that corporation through a charter. And that charter, up until about 1870 or the late 1800s, often those charters were taken away by the people when corporations didn't act in the public interest.
Well, in fact,
the first 70 years, a lot of the corporations had expiration.
I was going to say, yeah,
They only lasted 40 years and then they expired.
Well, they were put together for a particular purpose at a particular time, right? And
for
the
a
idea was,
railroad or something, build
right.
a railroad.
So when the purpose was accomplished or the time limit was reached, the corporation would dissolve itself. Whereas that was traditionally the role of corporations 150 years ago, right?
Exactly.
And so now that corporate model itself has been changed, right?
Yes, and now corporations are allowed to go on indefinitely, which is certainly not how a person lives their life. They expire. We have a limited amount of time.
Death and
Also,
taxes.
corporations are pathological. They don't have morals. They're not a human being. They don't have morals. If you think about giving, human beings have rights, but we also have a set of morals that we act on to do the right thing most of the time. You give those unlimited power and money to corporations and give them the same rights as people, you end up with corporations just to make profit. They get so big, they're bigger than other countries, and they start wars in Iraq or wherever to get oil, to make money, to make more profit. And we're in a situation now because of this corporate personhood ruling by the Supreme Court. We, the people, we can't reel them in.
Well, so just to be clear about, though, what move to amend is looking at. I mean, the size and power of corporations to follow business pursuits, as I understand, that's not part of the issue. So, for example, you talked about oil. Well, to do oil drilling requires a tremendous amount of resources. You need a huge amount of capital for the equipment that is needed. You need research and development. You need to be able to go and set up in foreign countries. So only a very large organization can actually accomplish that purpose. So is it the size of the organization that's at issue, or is it this issue of personhood, and how do we separate those two?
I don't have a problem separating them. I simply think, like Steve was saying, they're simply not people, no matter how big or small they are. They don't have the rights. I think that the Constitution and the Bill of Rights have said that clearly, and we are...
Have said what?
That we, as human beings, have the rights to free speech, et
But
cetera.
the Bill of Rights doesn't, as far as I know, it doesn't address what a corporate, I don't think it does. It's
No,
silent
but
on
it
the
gives,
subject.
word
it gives a
corporation is
human,
not in the
it's
Right,
not in
right,
there,
it's
it's
not
not
in
in
it
there,
at all,
but it does say that human beings have certain rights. It certainly doesn't say that corporations have rights, or it doesn't.
Well, that's
But
why
I
we want to
think-
amend the Constitution. We will make
Yeah.
this very clear.
But-
We want to amend the Constitution to say that only natural human beings have the rights enumerated under the Constitution.
And so if
And that would exclude corporations,
So what would change
unions,
if you were
any entity.
if you were to accomplish that purpose and that amendment were passed, and it was stated very clearly, as you say, that only natural human beings have the rights enumerated in the Bill of Rights, how would that change things?
Then Congress could pass laws to limit corporations from spending, from contributing to political campaigns. The municipalities...
Because the corporations would have no constitutional rights.
Yeah, they would not have a constitutional right because they would not be able to say, well, I have, as a corporation, under corporate personhood, we have First Amendment rights of free speech, and we have this right that, and because the Constitution states that money is speech, therefore
Wait,
we can spend our money.
The Constitution Did
Well,
you
since
say
the Supreme
Constitution
Court has ruled that.
has ruled that they feel that money is speech. Right?
And
They
that's
have
why we want to amend the Constitution to make clear on that, because the Supreme Court is ruling that money is speech. That actually, money is speech goes all the way back to Buckley versus Vallejo, 1976. That's how long we've had that
So would
ruling
this
from the
be
Supreme Court.
one constitutional amendment or two? One that removes corporate personhood from
I think it would be one.
one.
Yeah,
Um,
it would state both.
And there's also, right now, and this is the thing where I realize all the discussion about the Constitution and the terminologies, but I think what the biggest goal I see in terms of move to amend right now is really informing the public as to why this is being done, what corporations have done to the American economy, why we need to put limits on them, and the public is not really aware of it. So I think one of the move to amend is sort of divided into two parts, and one is the legislative part, and one is really the informing the public of what is going on and what is happening in this country. So
what is going on?
Okay,
what is happening?
What is it?
What is going on? You mentioned about telling people what is going on and what is happening. So
Well,
what,
I think
what's your vision of what
my
that
vision is that the corporations have actually taken over this country and have really, and particularly with the media, has been able to manipulate the American public. So they really don't know what's happening. They believe what they're told, and they're not being educated in terms of, the kids today are not being educated in terms of civics and history, and they have no background on knowing what are the intents of the Constitution, what are the rights, and I think corporations have been extremely abusive. I think they have kept the money at the top, the 1%, while they have let go of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of employees. They've cut their pension plans and their health care, and they're just ready to pounce on Social Security and Medicare.
I could run you through some Supreme Court
But-
decisions that speak to this real quickly. Back in 1906, Hale versus Henkel, corporations were given, under this corporate personhood idea, they were given Fourth Amendment protection of search and seizure. So the government was trying to come in and look at their books, and they said, no,
We're a person, you can't do
we're a
that."
person, you don't have a right to do that. Pennsylvania Coal versus Mahan in 1922, company was given Fifth Amendment rights, part of the taking clause of the Fifth Amendment, and they used that to make a case that regulations are deemed a taking. You're taking something from me. So they couldn't be regulated in that ruling. 14th Amendment is a big one. The 14th Amendment was the start of this whole corporate personhood issue. That goes back to 1886, Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad, and that's where this concept of corporate personhood first started, and the railroad was saying, you don't have a right to tax me more than some other bodies being taxed, because that's a violation of my 14th Amendment right of equal protection under the law. There's some controversy on that ruling and whether that was really what the Supreme Court ruled, but it basically got into case law, this corporate personhood idea that then creeped in.
Well, in fact, talk about
And
that controversy for
I'll just mention one other thing, because this is really big. Take an example of Walmart wants to come into a community. They, and say the community does not want them to move in for various reasons. Maybe they feel like it's going to ruin all the small businesses, it's going to be bad for their environment, whatever their reason is, or they're going to bring in low-paying jobs with no health care, and that's not what the community wants. Well, what does Walmart do, and they've done this many times? They go to court, and they say, we're a person, we have Fourth Amendment rights, we're not being treated equally under the law, and they win the case. So move to amend is bigger than campaign finance. That's big, and we got to fix that. And the great thing, what we really want is publicly financed elections, but we can't pass laws like that until we fix the Constitution. But it's bigger than that. It's corporate rule that we have right now.
So let's go back to something you mentioned a minute ago about the controversy over whether the decision in Southern Pacific versus Santa Clara, whether or not that actually did rule that corporations were people.
Yeah.
There is some, in fact, I've heard this story elsewhere,
Right.
that it was a law clerk who changed, that the court did not in fact rule that, but the way the law clerk wrote it up.
She mentions an activist judge. Well, we had an activist law clerk who wanted that to be the ruling, so or maybe it was an error, but there's some people are saying that was probably deliberate. That, you know, it was their ideology that they wanted it to be ruled that way. But I think from what I've heard, the consensus is that yes, the railroad came to the Supreme Court and asked for, made a case that due to their 14th Amendment rights and corporate personhood, that the court should rule in their favor. The court actually ruled in their favor, but did not say that it was due to Fourth Amendment rights or personhood. But yes, the clerk of the court wrote it in there, and back then they didn't have Google and computers and things. So something gets written at the top of the brief that summarizes the brief, and then every law clerk from then on for 100 years, they just look at what it says at the summary at the top, and if it's wrong, that's what, you know, they tend to use that.
But so that became the de facto ruling of the court because
Right.
it had been transcribed that way initially, right?
But it you know, like I said, by 1906, Hale versus Henkel, they were ruling because of corporate personhood, they gave them Fourth Amendment rights. So it started creeping in, certainly by 1906, it was in the rulings by the Supreme Court.
So what will it take? A constitutional amendment is a big deal. That takes 2/3 of the states to say yes. How difficult will it be, and how would such an amendment get drafted?
I think, personally, you know, I'm sort of general on this, but there's been 5 amendments already proposed by different, you know, either in the House or the Senate. Each one is a little bit different. Bernie Sanders wrote one. Durbin has written another one. They're all, you know, one's more about election laws. One's more about overturning Citizens United. I mean, they're all a little different in their terminology.
And those are very specific to the effect on elections. But what Steve's talking about, this much broader issue of corporate personhood as a concept. At least I haven't read anything about any such initiative being drafted in either house of the National
and I don't think, I really, well, I
speak to it. But go ahead.
I think we're very far from that in terms of at least 6 months to a year. I don't think anybody is in agreement yet on the terminology and how it should best be, you know, worded. And I do feel that that's not the only way to go. I think we can go simultaneously with legislation, and I think there's some people are trying that or talking about it, to put, you know, to clamp down on election law and limits, and then also going after the FEC, the SEC and the I got the wrong one. The FCC and the FEC, and
well, there is also a move with the SEC in order to force corporations to reveal how they're spending shareholder money on these corporate contributions, right?
Sounds like a violation of the First Amendment to me, freedom of speech.
So
That's what they're going to claim.
Yeah,
so the root cause is this corporate personhood issue, and this money is speech issue, and so you have to amend it. But if I could have a minute, I could talk about Move to Amend strategy on this. When I got involved in Move to Amend, which was probably about now 6 months ago.
And the whole organization is fairly new, right?
It's very
6
well.
months
It sprang up.
Makes you a veteran, right?
Yeah, it makes me a veteran.
And it's evolving.
It does. Move to Amend sprang up and formed shortly after January 21st of 2010, which is when the Citizens United decision was handed down by the Supreme Court. But there's people in Move to Amend that have been working these kind of issues for 15 years plus. But so Move to Amend's approach 6 months ago was, you know, the idea to amend the Constitution as we described it, but the strategy of how to do it, the feeling was, well, let's look at other amendments that have happened in the past, you know, women's vote, end of slavery, you know, you name it. And, well, not end of slavery, but, well, yeah, that was that's also an amendment. So all these things that we have accomplished over time took time. So we were thinking in the terms of a 10 to 15 year period, and that seemed like it kind of made sense 6 months ago. Then the Occupy movement came. It's like things have changed. People seem to be a little more active and more concerned about these issues, and there's a lot of commonality between the Move to Amend movement and what Occupy is saying. So I'm more in the mindset, I don't know what the national organization would say at this point, but I think we're more in like a 4-year period. We certainly recognize that this election cycle for 2012, that we are in an awareness period. And the idea is to get non-binding referendums on the ballot asking the citizens if they support amending the U.S. Constitution to end corporate personhood. And also going to legislative bodies and having them pass non-binding resolutions stating that they support amending the U.S. Constitution to get corporate money out of our elections and, you know, all the language of the amendment. And so it's all non-binding this cycle. And we don't have to get the language exactly perfect. It's just a non-binding question to get people's ideas, you know, whether they support this or not. I think 2014 is when the binding referendums come in. And then as far as the procedure for how an amendment is done, it starts in the House and the Senate. They bring forth the bill. It has to get passed in the House and the Senate. I forget what it is, 3/5 or something of the vote. And then this is a little different. A amendment doesn't go once it's passed by the House and Senate. It doesn't go to the president. It goes back to the states. And
Two-thirds of whom?
2/3 of the states, the legislatures have to pass it. Once they pass it, then it comes back to the federal, and it's an amendment. So,
but it's a tremendous job, and I think what we have to do, meanwhile, is educate the public. The public has to be behind it, and so I think along with all of the resolutions, non-binding resolutions, referendums, whatever, without public support, we don't have it, and it would take years and years, and I don't think we have time as a country to wait years and years.
Well, Sharon, that will have to be the last word on the subject. We're out of time already.
Okay.
So, Sharon, Steve, I want to thank you so much for coming here and educating us on what the issues really are. Hope you'll come back as we make progress on the issues, right?
absolutely.
Thank you very much.
And I want to thank you for joining us once again for Public Perspective. I'm your host, Kevin McDermott, and you can find us on Comcast Channel 19 every Saturday night at 8, and you can also find us on the web at publicperspective.tv. Till next time, thank you and good night.